What we're going to be doing today is looking at some really popular album covers from today and yesterday to show you how style has changed over the years, but the principles of design remain the same. So we're going to be seeing the differences and similarities between album covers today and some album covers from back in the day. Let's go. All right, guys, so here we are looking at an album cover from Georgia, her album Seeking Thrills. Now, this album just dropped in 2020. I believe it came out this year. And we're seeing that the design itself, look at the image itself. Kids jumping up, having a good time. They're probably at a party or a concert of some sort. And what's the focal point of the image? It's this girl right here. She's jumping up in the air, and these two behind her seem to kind of be looking down at her. It's easy to focus on her also because everyone else seems much taller than her. So the first thing you think is, what? You got this young kid having a good time amongst all these bigger, taller kids. And when you were a kid, what did you want to do? Hang out with the big kids, right? Feel like an adult, right? You don't need your parents. You just want to go out and have fun with all the older kids. So she becomes the focal point. Not only because she's smaller and shorter than the rest of the people here, but also because it calls back to an aspiration that we had when we were kids. See how it gives us the story of, I want to hang with the older kids. I want to feel older. I want to feel mature. So she is the focal point. I've said that 3 times. I'll say it again. She is the focal point. And focal points are what every design needs to really be effective. Why? Because if there's so much going on in design at once, this is a pretty dramatic picture, how will we know what to look at first? See, a good designer wants to go easy on the viewer by letting us know what we should focus on. That's why we have this shorter kid having fun right here. She's the focal point. And that is why the typography is also very simple. Because if this was a fancy typeface, you would be conflicted between, should I look at this fancy type or should I look at this girl having a good time? What's the focal point? It takes a designer to understand, it takes an understanding of focal points to know when to really dial up that typeface to something crazy and spectacular and when not to. It's an ebb and flow. That's how it is. Let's take a look at another album cover. This one also comes from this year. This is by Soccer Mommy, and the album's called Color Theory. Now, what is the focal point here? If you see the picture of the close-up picture of Soccer Mommy, the girl here, we know that she is the focal point. But let's look at the typography on the side. The title on the vertical axis that says Soccer Mommy. On the side, we have Soccer Mommy written on the vertical axis, and the color that has been used contrasts with these blues that have been used for Soccer Mommy's face. So although she is the focal point, her title stands out as well. But we still know to look at the girl first. How do we know this? Well, there's a design reason as well as a psychological reason. The design reason goes like this. This image of the girl has been zoomed in such that it is the biggest element, such that we know that she is the focal point. So that scale and that size, that close-up is how we know. Scale, as I have mentioned last week, is one of the principles of graphic design. If you want to show contrast between elements, one way to do it is by showing a difference in scale. Now, what's the psychological reason why? In Jim Davies' book, Riveted, as well as in Matthew Lieberman's book, Social, they both say that we are more interested in human interaction than anything else. Why? Because we're human. Makes sense. We want to know how to relate to other humans in the world. So, of course, Soccer Mommy's face is going to be more interesting to us than the words that say Soccer Mommy off to the side. So even though the color of that typography contrasts with Soccer Mommy's face and figure, we know innately to look at her first. Color Theory, the title, is all the way in the bottom right corner. So we're not distracted by the title. We're allowed to look at that later. Now, so far I've shown you album covers from today. Let's go back in the day. Jackie McLean's Let Freedom Ring, an album of jazz from the Blue Note label. See, back in the 50s and 60s, Blue Note was the label to be on. So many amazing artists went through there. Coltrane, Miles Davis, Eric Dolphy, Art Blakey. Now, what is the focal point here? We see a picture of Jackie. The album is called Let Freedom Ring. We see a picture of Jackie in the word let. But is Jackie really the focal point? Let's think about that Soccer Mommy album. Soccer Mommy's figure was really zoomed in upon. It took up the majority of the album cover. Combine that with our need for human interaction, we knew that she was the focal point of the cover. Now, Jackie McLean is also a human, so shouldn't we consider him the focal point of this picture as well, of this album cover as well? Well, not necessarily. Look at how he has been scaled down. He looks smaller than the typography in the picture. He has been limited to the letter L in the word let. Meanwhile, all the words let freedom ring stand much, much bigger and bolder. Bold and in black. So the message, not Jackie, but Jackie's message, is the most important part of the album. It is the focal point of the album cover. Let freedom ring. But just so you don't forget who you're looking at, his name, Jackie McLean, is written, or typed I should say, in a different color than the words let freedom ring. Jackie McLean is still important, but it is his message that is most important. See, this is how we're using scale to establish a focal point in the album cover. Let's move on to more jazz. One of my favorite old school jazz albums of all time. The album with the classic song Take 5, the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Now, unlike these past couple albums, there are no people in this album cover. Abstract painting. So what's the focal point here? Bit of a battle going on between the words Time Out, which is the title of the album, and the artwork that you see taking up about 2/3 of the cover. Let's also look at the typography treatment in this album cover. What's the first thing we see in the typography? The words Time Out. Why? Because Time Out has been scaled to be larger than any of the other words on the cover. But there seems to be a method to this madness. What is the designer trying to do? What does the designer want you to know immediately after the artwork? He wants you to know the album is called Time Out. Then you have the Dave Brubeck Quartet written in black, unlike the rest of the typography, unlike Time Out and some other typography, which we'll get into in a second, which has been done in a orangish brown color. The Dave Brubeck Quartet was a pretty famous group back then. So of course, to get you to buy the album, you have to know that this is by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. So that's important as well. What do they want us to see next? Can you guess? It's Take 5, because Take 5 is the Dave Brubeck Quartet's most popular song. They want you to know what you're going to be getting out of this album. First, they want you to see that this album is going to be very artistic, very abstract. After all, Dave Brubeck himself said in an interview that in this album, they were trying out new things. Take 5 was actually considered to be very experimental because it was written in 5/4 time for the metronome, for all you music buffs out there, for all you jazz buffs out there. So this abstract, colorful, experimental artwork really speaks to the kind of music you're going to get. Then they want you to know the name of the album is Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. So that information has been scaled up, or it's been written in a different color, a color that contrasts with white a bit more so than this orange brown does. Then they want you to know that it includes the song that, if you were coming up back then, the song that you're most familiar with from them, Take 5. So we're seeing how good design does a good job of showing which information is meant to be viewed first, second, third, and whatever else comes after that. So we're seeing a lot of instances in which focal points are being expressed through difference in scale. Are there other ways to show focal points? Well, there's difference in color, and there are differences in other principles of design. Again, it all comes back to how different elements contrast with each other. So, the question is, what are the focal points in your designs? I'm Chuck West of CW Brand Solutions. Thanks for watching. Go design something great.